Fraction, decimal, percent chart. Going from a percent to a fraction and a decimal. You have the percent 50%. The decimal is not there for us to see, but we know every number has a decimal. When it doesn't show one, it is behind that number. So we want to go from a percent to a decimal. We're going to move away from the percent sign 2 places. We always move 2 places no matter how many numbers are in the number. We have moved it to in front of the 5, so we now have the decimal 0.5. That now is the percent 50% to the decimal 0.5. To turn any decimal into a fraction, you write the top, you draw your fraction line. Every real number on top, any number from 1 to 9, gets a 0 buddy. Everybody gets a buddy. The decimal that you had in front of the 5 becomes a 1. So now you have 5/10 is the same as 0.5 is the same as 50%. Let's go down to 100%. Again, there is no decimal in this number, but there is a decimal that exists. We just don't write it. It is behind the last number. When going from a percent to a decimal, we always move 2 places. We're moving away from the percent sign because we're turning it into a decimal. So we now have 1.00, which of course could just be written as 1. Now, to go from our decimal to a fraction, we write the number on top. Well, there is no number behind it, so we just have 1/1, which of course equals 1. Let's now look at the thirds. We have 3 numbers in our percent, 33.3%. We find the decimal, and there is one that exists this time. We move it only 2 places. We move it away from the percent sign to make a decimal. So we now have a new decimal in front. We have all 3 3's behind it. We want to turn our decimal into a fraction. We draw our fraction line. All the real numbers go on top. Our 3, 3, 3. 3 gets a buddy. 3 gets a buddy. 3 gets a buddy. That decimal turns into a 1. The number of zeros depends on the number of numbers on top. Just like 5 in 0.5 had only one number, it got only 1 0. Let's look at 66.6%. Here's our decimal. We move it 2 places, always, away from the percent sign because we don't want percent anymore. So now our decimal goes in front. We have a 6, and a 6 behind it. We keep all real numbers. So to make a decimal into a fraction, we draw our fraction line. All numbers go on top. 6 gets a buddy. 6 gets a buddy. 6 gets a buddy. That decimal turned into a 1. And 100%, you already have an example of that. 100% became 1 with a decimal behind it, and we don't even need that decimal. We could just write a 1. And as a fraction, it is also just 1. All right, let's again go down to the eighths because those are usually our sticklers. So we are looking again at the eighths. Let's start with 12.5%. It already has a decimal. We're always going to move that decimal 2 places away from the percent. We don't want the percent anymore. So we now have a decimal in front and a 1, 2, 5. To turn that decimal into a fraction, we draw that fraction line. Our real numbers go on top, 125. Everybody gets a buddy. 5 gets a 0, 2 gets a 0, 1 gets a 0. And that decimal in front turns into a 1. You'll notice we have not had to use the calculator on this page at all. We're just moving decimals and then making them into fractions, just like we've done on the Ames web every week this year. Let's do our last one together, 25%. There is no decimal, but we know that there's 1 behind it. Every number has a decimal. So to get rid of the percent, we move it 2 places to the left, away from the percent sign. So now we have decimal 2, 5. And this looks more like what we've been doing in Ames web. We've got a 25 on top. 5 gets a 0, 2 gets a 0. That decimal in front turns into a 1. 25 hundredths equals 0.25 equals 25%. Let's try it on our own now. That was fractions, decimals, and percent conversions, starting with the percent.